Good morning. I'm Catherine Bede. Thank you for being here. Today we are going to be painting a butterfly. And here's the example that I posted on the class. This one is sort of a teal or greenish blue and blue butterfly. Of course, you can make this butterfly whatever color you would like it to be. I've also done yellow and purple. So this is a fun butterfly that you can do in whatever color you'd like. We're going to learn how to draw it first on a grid, and we're going to use some pen and ink details and add some watercolor to it and some spatters at the end. So that's the finished product. I'm going to switch my screen so you can see my workspace. Good. I'm going to go over the list of supplies first. So we are going to be drawing on a grid paper today. So either you've printed this or have drawn it in your sketchbook. So grid paper, that'll be the first thing. And we're also going to be using some tracing paper. And we're going to be painting on an 8x10 sheet of watercolor paper. I am using this Fluid 100 cold press. This one is a 300-pound paper. You could use 140-pound and that would be just fine. I also have I have a Coroplast board here that I use under my work. So we're going to be stretching our paper to our work surface. So you just need some sort of waterproof, rigid work surface to work with. I also have painter's tape, or you could use artist tape. We're going to be using that to stretch our paper. I've got a number 2 pencil. So you can use a drawing pencil or regular, this is a Papermate sharp writer that I like to use, mechanical pencil. We're going to be using a black felt tip waterproof pen to add some details to our butterfly. I'm using a number 8 round brush. I think I had a number 6 or 8 round brush on the supply list. This one's kind of a smaller number 8. So anything in that range. I think I also maybe put a small brush on the list. So if you have a small brush, that will come in handy. If you don't, we can improvise. I also have a kneaded eraser. So we're going to be doing some drawing at the beginning of the class to draw our butterfly on this grid paper. And this kneaded eraser is nice for erasing because it doesn't leave eraser bits on your paper. I also have a spray bottle. I have a water container off to the side here. It's just a cottage cheese tub. So it's going to be in the upper right-hand corner. You won't be able to see it. I also have some paints. So today I am using this little set that I put together. This is a palette that came empty and I added pans to it. So these are the colors that I have in this set. For the example, I used ultramarine blue and viridian. I also put white on the list, you might have noticed. So when I've done this painting before, I left white space around the sides of the butterfly to make these little dots. I thought it would be fun to experiment with using white watercolor paint to make those dots instead of having to paint around them. So we're going to experiment with that today. We've talked about it. We're going to do it today. So for the painting, you can use whichever colors you'd like. I have another example here. This is my original version of this butterfly where I use yellow and some reds inside, a little bit of burnt sienna or maybe quinacridone gold there. And so it can be really be whatever you like. We're also going to use some Payne's gray for the edges of the butterfly. You could just use the pen too if you like, but there are some areas that are a little bit thicker around the edges. So we'll probably use Payne's gray for that. I also have some paper towels underneath my palette here for blotting my brush after I wash it. And I think that covers everything. Any questions about the supplies? Okay, so we're gonna move right on to drawing this butterfly. So I like to use the grid because it's just a little bit easier to draw everything symmetrically and proportionally. So we're going to start by, and I'm going to use this smaller example. We're going to start with drawing the body, and then we're going to start with drawing the shapes of our wings and the curves going around the outside. And then we're going to add these details to the inside of the wings to create those shapes. So the first thing we're going to do is sort of pick a spot in our grid to make that the body of the butterfly. So I'm going to start right here. I'm starting 1, 2, 3, 4 rows down, and we're just going to make an oval shape right around this middle line. So just a nice kind of elongated oval shape. You don't necessarily have to draw as dark as I'm drawing, but I'm drawing it so that you can see it. So that's going to be sort of this top part of the body here. And actually, I'll leave this over here so we can see it. And then we're going to continue on and draw this bottom part. So we're just going to draw another elongated oval connected to the middle one that we just drew. And it's going to span about 1 1/4 of these squares here. Yours could be longer or shorter. So don't worry about getting it exactly the same as mine, but I kind of went down 1 1/4 squares. And the reason I start with these shapes is because I just like to make drawing a little bit easier by breaking things down into shapes. So when I look at that butterfly, those are the first shapes I see. So we're going to continue on to the head here, and we're going to draw a little circle at the top of that first oval, and it goes about 1/4 of the way up the square.
Did you say circle, excuse me, or yeah?
Yeah, just this little circle right here.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then we're going to draw kind of 2 diagonal little ovals for eyes on either side of the head up there. Now, when we actually paint this, and I'm going to hold it up a little bit closer so you can see what I just did, just those little eyes. We're not going to actually paint those eyes individually, but we're kind of just making the head the shape it needs to be with the eyes kind of bulging out on the sides. So you can see that's kind of the shape we're going for, and it's going to be all dark. So it's doesn't need to be too precise. So now we're going to block in the wing shapes. And what I'm going to have you do is just go down one line below where the body ended down here. And we're going to make a box here around this butterfly. So I'm just going to darken this line. We're not going to use this for anything other than to just create a boundary for our butterfly. So I'm going to go down one and then 3 squares over on each side. I'm just kind of drawing a line there. And I'm going to do the same thing above the head. So I'm going to go 2 squares up from the head. And I'm just going to darken that line up here. So that's going to be our top boundary and our bottom boundary. And then we're going to connect those on the sides. So you should have a box that's about 5 squares high and 6 squares wide. And this is just going to help us keep the wings within that boundary, just to help us visualize it a little bit better. So then we're going to start drawing our wings. And I'm just going to make 2 points of reference up at the top here on that line that we just drew. 1 square in, I'm going to add a dot. Same thing on the other side. So I have 2 dots at the top of my box, 1 square in. So that's going to be the point of reference for the top of our wings. Then we're going to draw the top of our wings we're going to start down here right under the head, and we're going to draw kind of a curved line up to that point of reference. Same thing on the other side. Curved line from the bottom of the head to that point. Now I'm going to draw a line where I want the bottom of the top wing to connect to the butterfly. And we're going to have it connect at the bottom of this first oval. And it's going to go from the bottom of that first oval out 2 squares, and we're going to draw a little curved line on each side of that. And then we're just going to start creating those curves on the outer wing. So to make this top part of the wing, we're going to just draw a curve in this square, sort of rounding out the corner of that square up here to make the top curve of that wing. The same thing on the other side. We're just sort of rounding that corner. And I'm going to continue down. I'm going to draw an inward curving line down through the next square, and I'm going to end it right in the middle of the square below it. So just a line that kind of curves in, and then we can kind of smooth that out as it connects to that curve above. And then we're just going to connect that to that lower line that we drew for the bottom of the wing with another outwardly curving line. So kind of like an S curve on each side. Okay, so we're going to continue on with our lower wings. So we are going to start right here where this bottom wing connects to this line, or the top of the bottom of the top wing connects to this line. And we're going to draw a point of reference on the next line down, halfway in the middle of that line. So here, we'll do the same thing on the other side. I'm just going to draw a point of reference here, right in the middle of this, the top of this square. And we're going to draw a curved line, kind of curves and then goes down to that line. And then we're going to skip this piece for now. We're going to come down to these two squares right here at the bottom of our box. So one square in from each side. And we're going to draw a little curved line like this, like a smiley face, right at the bottom. So it goes kind of a quarter of the way up. So right there on each side. And then what we're going to do is we're going to connect that line with a pretty straight line on each side. We're going to connect it to that curve we made up here. And then we're going to find the middle point on this lower body part, the middle point in this square. So I'm just drawing two dots here on each side of this lower body part. And then I'm going to connect the bottom of that wing to that point on each side.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So then we're gonna come up to this oval at the top of the body, and I'm going to draw a little point of reference on each side here, right here, these two. And then we're going to connect that lower wing with a curved line up to those points. And really that lower wing in reality is behind the top wing, but that's going to be one of the lines here in our drawing. So now we're going to start drawing those lines inside of the butterfly. We just drew this one. We're going to draw another one right above it, and it's going to connect to the same point. So we're just going to draw a dot out here on this outer wing, kind of like right in the middle of that curve right here. And then we're going to connect that line to the middle of the body. So it's this line here that we just drew.
It's not particularly straight. It is straight.
It's
not
a little curved.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little curved. Okay, now we're going to draw a line at the top of the wing. So we're going to make up a point of reference right in the middle of the top of this curve up here. And this, we're going to connect right underneath the head. So we're just going to draw a nice curved line up to that point, or from that point down to the head. And I like to sort of, if I'm coming this way, I like to drag my whole arm and wrist to make a smoother line. And we're going to add a couple lines down here in the lower wing. So we're going to add one that connects to this point of reference here that I'm going to draw. So this is 2 squares up right in the middle of this curve here. I'm making a point of reference there. And I'm going to connect this line to the bottom of the top body part. So kind of like right in the middle of the body here. Nice curved line. It's going to kind of meet that upper wing. And then we're going to draw another one. It's going to connect from this point on the body, this lower body part, to the very bottom curve of this bottom wing where it touches this line here. I'm drawing 2 dots, and then I'm just drawing a line from, oh, sorry, not the bottom of the body, but where the middle of the body, the 2 ovals connect to each other. We're drawing a line from there down to the bottom of that wing.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to draw these inner parts of the wings here at the top and the bottom. So these inner cells here. We'll start with the bottom one. So it's going to be right in this area here. So all we need to do is just define this area a little bit more. And so what we're going to do is we've got this line that comes down here. Where that meets this line, I'm going to draw a point. So I'm 1 square in, and I'm going to draw that point on this side as well. So I've got my dots here. So that's going to be kind of the top of that cell over here. And then I'm going to draw another dot, the bottom of that square. That cell is going to be right in this area. And then I'm going to come over here and draw a dot halfway in from the one we just drew. So I've got 3 dots, 1, 2, 3 on each side. And then 1 more here where this line crosses over this line. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 dots. It's going to make up this area in the butterfly right here. Got those?
Yeah, I can see where I didn't, why my cell isn't looking like as wide as it should fill in.
It's just all within this square. So
Yeah.
that this square that's inside the bottom wing, you're working only within this square. So 1 dot here where this line crosses, 1 down here in this bottom corner, 1 here halfway in, and 1 at the lower left-hand corner of that square. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to connect those dots with little curved lines. So inward curving lines. So like little hills. So it kind of looks like a spider web. I'm going to do that on each side.
Oh.
So then I'm going to create these lines here by just extending and drawing a line. So I'm going to start down here. At this point, I'm drawing a line to the outer edge of the wing. Here, drawing a line to the outer edge of the wing, kind of where it meets this line. So kind of like in the middle of this line here, it's going to connect. And then right at this intersection, same thing over here. And draw a little line out to the edge of the wing there, and a little line out to the edge of the wing there. Okay, so we're going to move on to the upper part of the wing. And we're going to do the same thing we did down here. We're going to draw this area, this inner area of the wing. So we're going to draw some points of reference here. So we're going to start at the this square here. So you should have a square that's kind of right in the middle of that wing right here. It doesn't have any lines going through it except for this corner up here. So this is the square we're working with right here. The one right in the middle of the wing. I'm going to draw a dot right in the upper right-hand corner of that. And I'm going to draw a dot right in the middle of it. So upper left-hand corner on the other side, and then right in the middle of it. So you should have these 2 dots. Okay. And then one right at the bottom of it in the middle of the line. And then we're just going to connect. We've got a line kind of going through that square in the corner. So we're going to connect where that line meets to that dot that we just made with a little inward curving line. So I just drew these two lines. And then I'm going to connect the one in the corner to the one in the middle. I just drew those. And I'm going to connect the one in the middle to the one at the bottom. A little slightly curved line. So you should have what looks kind of like a 7 on the right-hand side and a backwards 7 on the left-hand side. And then we're going to connect that to the middle of the body here. So I'm just going to draw a line from the bottom of that 7 to the middle of the body here. Okay, so now we're going to draw some lines connecting those dots to the outer edge of the wing, kind of like what we did at the bottom. So I'm just going to draw from this top corner of this square out to the edge of the wing. And I'm kind of hitting this area where it meets the outer edge of this line. Doesn't have to be exactly there. Yours might be different. I'm doing the same thing on the other side. So we're kind of just following this same movement of this line at the top here. And then I'm going to keep going. I'm going to draw from the middle of this sort of 7 shape. I'm going to draw a little bit of a curved line out to the edge of the wing, right? And kind of hits the middle of this inward curve here. Same thing on the left side. And then I'm going to draw another one right here at the bottom of the 7, slightly curved out to the edge of the wing. So it kind of hits the same line on the edge of the wing here. So I just drew this line, and this line, these 3. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Now, the last piece of this drawing is we are going to make this outer edge of the wing here. So we're gonna start with this part right here. So right at the top of this 7 that we drew, right where it meets that line, we're going to connect that line to the top of the wing. So I'm drawing this line right here. And then we're going to draw kind of I think of it like a web, like a spider web around the outside. So I'm going to draw some curved lines all the way around the outside edge of this wing. So I just drew, it's about 1/4 of an inch in, I guess, not in every spot, but this line right around the edge. And it stops kind of where the bottom wing meets the top wing. So I'll do that again over here on the left-hand side. And it's not super precise, so don't worry about that, but you're trying to make this edge of the wing, and then it's going to stop right here where the top wing meets the bottom wing. And I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom, starting right about here. I'm going to make that outer edge kind of starts here on this line and ends on this bottom section of the bottom wing. We'll do that again on the left-hand side. Like that. Okay, so we've got just a couple little things to finish up and then we're done with our drawing. So up here, we're just gonna darken this line here from the edge of the wing to this point on both sides. Basically, we're trying to make this section separate, if that makes sense.
Oh,
that's
okay.
this part right here. Okay, and then we're going to draw the antenna. So the way I did it was I started right above the eyes and made kind of a little curved line that touches this square here. Yours could be different. Okay, so the next step is
That's important.
our tracing. When you're ready,
Okay.
we're going to take our tracing paper and our painter's tape. So I'm going to take a little piece of painter's tape and I'm going to set this guy aside for now. And I'm going to put one little small piece of painter's tape at the top of my drawing here so it doesn't move around. And then I'm going to put my tracing paper on the top, and I'm also going to tape that at the top so it doesn't move around. I'm also going to write the word front at the top. Now, it doesn't really matter that much on this drawing because it should be fairly symmetrical, whether it's front or back, but it's going to make it a little bit easier to transfer our drawing to our watercolor paper if we use the correct side. So what we're doing now is we're going to trace all of our lines, and we're going to use this tracing to transfer our drawing to our watercolor paper. So we're going to trace all the lines of the butterfly, and I kind of like to start from the top and work my way down. And when I get to the head, I'm not really going to trace the eyes, but I'm going to trace around the shape of the head. So you'll notice if you go around the eyes, it's not really a circle anymore. It's the shape of the head of a bug now. I trace the body. And then I'm going to go around the outer edge of the wings first. And again, think of the upper wings as being in front and the lower wings in the back. So here's what I have so far. I have just the outline of the butterfly. So I check from time to time, lift up my paper to make sure I'm tracing all the lines. So I'm just going around the bottom wings now. And then I'll start adding in my lines, and I'm going to start at the top here. So I've got this line that I know kind of goes all the way. Actually, I don't want it to go all the way to the edge. So when we get to our outer edge, we're just going to trace this outer edge and not the lines that go through that outer edge. And I'm going to lift up my paper and show you what I mean. So we just want this outer edge without any lines going through it. And I'm going to trace the inside of this section. So it's going to look like that, the inside of that section. And then the lines that connect that section to the outer edge, but not through the outer edge. And then we do want this little horizontal line up here and this section. So that's what the top wing should look like when you've traced it. I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom wing. I'm going to start with this inner section. So I've got that inner section traced there. And I'm going to do the outer edge next. And then the lines that connect the inner section to the outer edge. So that's what your lower wing should look like. So you just have those sections now. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. We'll do this inner part first. I've got that inner part traced. And then I'm going to go trace that outer edge. I've got that part traced. And I'm going to draw the lines now that connect the inner section to the outer edge. There's my upper wing. Same thing for the lower wing. I'm going to trace this inner section, the butterfly, lower wing, and then the outer edge. And then those lines that connect to it. So I'm actually going to take my tracing off now and set my drawing aside. Just going to tape it to the side of my desk here. I'm going to bring my tracing back so that you can see what you should be shooting for there.
Hmm.
So our next step is going to be to turn our tracing over. I am going to move along and then you can sort of catch up when I
Right.
do my paper stretching. So I'm going to turn this tracing over. I just put a piece of paper underneath it to protect my work surface. And so now you can see the word front is backwards. That's what we want. And now we're going to add graphite to the back of this drawing on all the lines, or the back of all the lines. So this is the back of our tracing paper. And we're just scribbling graphite onto these lines with our pencil. And so this is going to help us transfer our drawing to the watercolor paper. So you don't need to be precise in any way other than just make sure you get graphite on the back of all those lines. I like to start at the top and sort of work my way down. And this drawing has a lot of lines. So just take us a minute to make these scribbles. You should be able to do it just fairly quickly with wide strokes of your pencil. It's going to be a lot faster for you if you do big scribbles rather than try to do little scribbles like this. This will take forever. So just do some nice big scribbles with your pencil. And then once you have all your scribbles done, you can just take a tissue or small piece of paper towel and just smooth over those lines a bit. Don't rub any of the graphite off, or not too much of it anyway. We just want to smooth it. And you'll see you have like some little graphite particles, and you can just shake those into your garbage can. And so your tracing should look sort of like that now. Or when you're finished with it. Okay, so I am going to set this aside and we're going to prepare our watercolor paper here. And take my paper and put it on my work surface, and I'm going to stretch it. So I'm going to take my painter's tape. I'm going to tape all the way around the edges. And I'm pressing down firmly as I go. All four sides. And I'm using painter's tape. You could also use artist tape, which is white or comes in other colors. This is painter's tape from the dollar store, which works just fine too. It's a little bit wider than artist tape. Artist tape comes in different widths. But I use a lot of this, so artist tape is more expensive. I'm going to take my tracing and place it on my watercolor paper and find a nice balanced place. So that looks about centered left to right. I'm leaving a little more space at the bottom for mine. You could center it top to bottom too if you want. And then I'm just going to put a piece of tape at the top so it doesn't move. And now you can see that I can read the word front, which is what I want. I want to be able to read the word front because this is the front of our drawing. Seems obvious, but sometimes it's not. And then I'm going to trace over all of these lines again. And the reason we do this process is so that we can do our drawing separate and not have to try to draw on our watercolor paper and do a lot of erasing or things like that, or if we have extra lines. Plus we can draw on a grid if we're doing that sort of drawing. So I'm going to go around the edges of the wing first. So kind of like the same process I did when I traced it the first time. Go around those outer edges first. And I'm going to lift up my tracing paper to make sure that I can see my lines, and I can. You just need them dark enough so that you can see them when you're painting. They don't have to be too dark. And I'm going to draw the body in here. make sure I can see that. Yes, so I can see the whole outside of this butterfly. And I'm going to draw all of these lines. On the inside, do our outer edge. In this inside section. Just make sure I got all those. Yes, I did. Same thing at the bottom. I'm going to go around this outer edge and the inside section. And all those. Oops, I missed one. Make sure I got all those. And then same process on the other side. Draw the lines on the inside and the outer edge here. Check my work. Work on this bottom wing here to this inside section. Make sure all the lines are there. And I think I got them all. So when you're done with that, it should look similar to what I've got here. I'm going to lift this up a little bit so you can see what it looks like. So we'll take a minute to finish that up. And in the meantime, I'll just talk about the process. So we're going to go in with our pen first, and we're going to outline the wings and all the sections. You could do it two ways. You could do your painting first. So you could add the watercolor paint first and the pen last. We're going to add the pen first and then the watercolor so that we don't have to wait for the watercolor to dry. You could do it either way if you have, as long as you have a waterproof pen. So we're going to do our pen first and then our painting. And the painting itself is fairly simple. The drawing is the hardest part of this painting. It's really just a wet and wet. If I bring back our original example, again, I've got like some Viridian on the inside and some ultramarine blue on the outside, and then Payne's gray on the edges. You could also just use the pen on the edges if you wanted it to be darker. And then we might experiment with some white dots around the edges. And then some spatters.
I have a choice of pen widths. What do you recommend?
Well, I have pretty fine, I don't know how many millimeters, but let me look at some of my other pens to see if I can find comparable.
Yeah, thank you.
I've got an 03 here that's
Okay.
very similar.
Okay, I can do it.
05 is just a little bigger. So I would say 03 or 05.
Okay. I'll start with 3 and then use the 5 for the wider.
Yeah. So we're just going to trace over all of these lines with our pen. And on the antenna, you might put a little dot if you want. Now, when it comes to the body, I'm going to smooth out the body with my pen. I'm not going to draw the sections individually. I'm going to sort of outline the body. And then we can go back and kind of erase those extra lines. Could have done that actually in our drawing, but we didn't, so do it here. And I'm going to just outline all of these wings. And once we're done with our pen, we can wait a minute, make sure it's dry, and then erase any pencil lines we don't want, or we can wait until after we've done our painting and erase any extra pencil lines. Kind of up to you. Just like to wait a minute or two after I use the pen to make sure it's completely dry, because it can, get smudged if it's not completely dry. Well, somehow my paper must have shifted. That's weird. I got my lines ending up in a different place at the bottom of this wing. So I'm just gonna darken it a little bit on each side and try to even it out, and it's not going to be a big deal. I'll improvise here.
We need to know how to improvise, thank you.
Yeah. So I like that about pen is that you can, if you mess up, you can maybe just make your line a little bit darker. Okay, now I'm going to start in on the inner lines. Draw all of those in, all of those little sections. So I start with just lines that are all the same width. And then I like to go back and make some thicker in certain places. And what I would recommend is that, and what we are going to do, we're going to do our painting first. I'm going to show you now what I do to make the lines thicker, but I'm not going to do it. And I'm going to recommend that you don't do it until after your painting is dry. So I'm going to show you how to do it, and then it's going to be, I don't like to use the word homework, but
Not a problem.
it's going to be your finishing up work for later after your painting is dry. And it'll help you with things like this, where you can see that my lines aren't like completely connecting at the same places on each side. So it's definitely not perfectly symmetrical. I missed a line here, so I'm just going to draw that guy in. Okay, so what I like to do, and I'm going to bring the example while you're finishing up your lines. You can see, like, especially in the corners, I've kind of rounded the lines and I've made them a little bit thicker, like where they meet the body. That is what I would do, and what I will do, and what your homework is going to be, is to go through and just smooth your lines, add some thicker lines, sort of like this, right where they meet the body or where they meet each other. So like I would smooth this line. And we could do all of this now, but in the interest of time, we're not going to. And I kind of think it looks better when you do the painting first, or the painting second. It looks better if you kind of go in after the painting is dry and add these details, because it kind of darkens it a little bit better. So I just go in like this and sort of darken these corners and make the lines a little bit thicker in places. So instead of just sort of stick lines that connect with each other, you've got these nice, smooth lines that are a little bit more interesting. And it makes these sections of the butterfly wing look more like sections than just lines. So this is what I'm talking about here. This is what you're going to do after your painting is dry. Thicken these little corners, and then like where the lines meet the body, we're going to just thicken these a little bit. How are you doing with your pen lines?
I have the top of one wing finished. I know your heart is probably sinking.
Yeah. Well, I might just move on.
Yeah.
And you can finish that later. So I'm just going to let this dry for a minute. Now I know, like down here, this is probably dry, but I'm just going to test it a little bit with my kneaded eraser. I've got some pencil lines that I want to erase them just lightly picking those up with the kneaded eraser. Same thing with the inside of this body. I know that's still wet, so I'm not gonna touch that. But if you have any pencil lines that are just really obvious and you don't want, once you paint over them, you won't be able to erase them. So just gonna pick those up a little bit. And then we are going to paint. So I'm going to spray my paints here. And I've got pans. I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to start with the Payne's Gray. And I'm also going to use ultramarine blue and some Viridian. And so I'm going to clean up my mixing area a little bit here.
I'm gonna wind up doing a yellow one and pink, and I'm just not much of a blue person.
Yeah, do yellow and pink for sure. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this Payne's Gray and just going to test a little bit on a test paper. I want it pretty dark and I want it less watery and more paint. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go around the outside edges, and I'm using my bigger brush, but you could use whichever size brush you're more comfortable with. The reason I'm doing the outside edges first is I'm really hoping that they're going to dry so we can try the white paint dots. It's really like always an experiment when it comes to painting. So I don't want too much water here because I don't want it to puddle up and I want it to dry fairly quickly. And I want it to be pretty dark. So hopefully at least one of these sections will dry before we're done. I think it will. So I'm just getting a little bit of water on my brush and picking up this Payne's Gray directly out of the pan. And I always spray my paints, even if I have tube paints, my palette, whether it's tubes or pans. I spray my paints first before I start painting with them. So just sort of reactivates them. So I'm just using the tip of my brush to get into these little spaces. If you have a smaller brush that you're more comfortable with, you could use that. Start up here. Try not to get my hand in the way of the camera. Carefully go around here. I have some areas that are darker than others, and that's okay. That it looks more like watercolor, I think, that way. I don't get too hung up on that. And if you have some jagged edges due to your pen, you can kind of smooth those out as you go along here. Now we could have maybe not outlined with pen on these sections, but I do think it just makes your edges a little bit cleaner if you do outline them with pen, even though you're painting with the dark paint. Okay, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna do the same thing in the body. I'm just painting this Payne's gray directly onto my paper. And if it dries and it's a little bit lighter, you can always darken it later. That's fine. So this looks good. It's drying really nicely over there. I'm just gonna let that do its thing. And then I'm gonna move on to the wings. So if you're not quite there yet, you can finish your edges later. So I'm gonna use the Viridian I have in here. I'm just gonna bring some out into my mixing area. I don't want too much water though. I want this to be pretty intense. Same thing with my ultramarine blue, or you could use another color. I have a really nice intense blue here, but I had ultramarine blue on the supply list, so that's what I'm going to use. Feel free to use any color you like. So we're just going to bring that out to the mixing area to get it ready. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a nice wet and wet here. So I'm actually going to take my brush and dip it in my water. Make sure it's clean. My brush is clean first, and then dip it into the water. And I'm going to go and paint over this whole area here. And even though this is a waterproof pen, I would say try to not overwork it. It can still have the potential to, I don't know if bleed is the right word, but maybe fade a little bit. So I'm just painting water in that whole area, and I'm just tilting my board so I can see I want it to be just glistening. I'm just making sure I have enough water there. Enough water so that these colors will bleed into each other really nicely. And then I'm going to pick up my color with my brush. I'm going to start with the Viridian, and I'm just going to drop that into that wing. And I'm trying to avoid the body that I just painted so that it doesn't bleed in there too much or bleed out. And so that looks really good. I'm just going to let that sort of do its thing there. And I did just touch the edge of that, so I'm going to give it a quick little blot like that. And then I'm going to bring in my ultramarine blue while working quickly. And I like to just kind of go around the edges and let it bleed into the middle and leave a little white space there. So I'm just going around these edges carefully. My brush. And there's never one way to do this. There's always multiple ways. We could have waited and done the Payne's gray last on the edges after we added our color to the wings, but we did want to do our experiment with the white paint, so I wanted it to dry. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of extra paint, some darkness right at the edges. So let that flow together. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So again, I'm painting with the water directly out of my water container. And this is the wet and wet technique. And making sure I have enough water on that, just kind of looking at it from the side to see if it's glistening but not puddled, which is what we want. And I'm going to start by adding this meridian. You can see I just sort of drop it in there with my brush. And I'm just kind of staying away from that body for now because I just painted it. You can always come in with your brush a little later and clean up any white spaces that you don't want. If you don't want the white spaces, if you want the white spaces, then you can leave them there. So I'm going to wash my brush and come in with some ultramarine blue around the edges. And again, I'm doing this kind of quickly because I don't want that water to dry before I get a chance to add the paint to it. So I'm just going around the edges and letting that paint flow into the water and into the other paint color. And I'm going to add a little bit more ultramarine blue. And again, I have a couple little white spaces, but we can either clean that up with the pen or some more Payne's gray when it's dry. So I did leave a little bit of white space. I kind of like that look myself. It's totally up to you whether you want that or not. And I'm going to move on to the lower wing. So I'm going to come back over here to this side, painting my water all the way up to those edge sections. And come in here with the meridian on the inside here. I suppose we could have painted this whole entire side, depending on how you want it to look. I do find it's a little bit easier to work with smaller sections when you're doing wet and wet because a big section like this has the potential to dry before you get to it, the whole thing. So that's why I kind of like to kind of break it down into smaller sections. And then if you did want different colors on the bottom for some reason, you could do that too, but just using the same. Add a little bit more darkness to the edge here. And then I'm going to repeat the same thing on the other side. Add my water first. And then my Viridian here. And then the ultramarine. The edges here. My edges are drying quite nicely, which I'm very happy about. I'm just going to go all the way up to that white space, cover that up. And just a little bit more darkness here on the edges. That is our wing painting process. Now, I'm going to keep moving here. And here is the big experiment. I'm going to take my small brush and I'm going to add some water to this white watercolor paint. And I see something right away that I did wrong, which is this was supposed to be Payne's Gray right here. So that's actually dry. I'm going to go back and add Payne's Gray to that. But first, so this is supposed to be Payne's Gray and it's supposed to have the white dots in it. It's okay. Fix that in a sec. So I'm going to go around and add my white dots around the edge. So I'm using this little #1 brush and I'm just using the tip of the brush to kind of lay this paint on top of the other paint, the Payne's Gray. And the reason this works is because our white paint is an opaque color. It's actually more opaque than the Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray has some transparency to it. I'm just going along and making little dots. And I have said in many classes that traditionally white is not used in watercolor. And it's not, but there are some applications for it. And we're going to use it for this one for fun. So that's working quite nicely. I have an artist in the gallery who uses white paint in her watercolor paintings, and they're really beautiful. So breaking the traditional rules here, but it's kind of like art shouldn't have like too many rules, I don't think. So I think this is really fun, actually. It'll be interesting to see how it dries. If it dries much lighter. Yeah, I'm going to go back and I'm going to fix that area that I didn't paint with Payne's Gray. So this should be darker, this section. So I'm just going to paint over that. Same thing on the other side. And then when that's dry, and it's drying pretty fast. When it's dry, I will add some dots to that section as well. And then the final piece of this, we're going to add some spatters. So I'm going to add some water to these colors that I already have in my mixing area. These are the colors I'm going to use for the spatters. And when you do spatters, you have to really have kind of a watery mix of paint. So I'm just loading the brush with this watery mix. You can see I'm kind of using the side of my brush here. And once I've got it loaded, I'm going to show you what my hand is going to look like when I hold it over the paper. So it's going to look like this. I've got the end of the brush in the palm of my hand. I've got my finger here on the top of the brush. So really it's going to look like this when I do it, but I want you to see how I'm doing it. So I'm going to be tapping down on the brush with my finger, and I'm going to do it pretty forcefully. So I'm going to hold it over the areas that I want spatter. So I think I'm going to do this corner and this corner. And so I'm tapping down, loading my brush, tapping down. Now, if you see that a spatter got somewhere that you don't want it, maybe you don't want one inside your butterfly, you can just blot those really quick. No problem. And I'm going to also do the viridian. So I'm going to add some water to that. Make it nice and watery. I'm going to do the same process, load my brush really well and tap, 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 tap. And if you haven't done that before, it might take some practice. You can also use another thing like a pen or a pencil and tap down like this, but sometimes the spatters will come back at you when you do it that way. So just be aware. You can touch it up afterwards, like I said, like I'm doing here. You can go in and make some of these lines thinner and thicker and connect these lines to these sections with some nice just smooth out these lines a little bit like this. So as long as you can still see your lines, you're going to be okay. You can go over it.
Oh,
And then, of course, we want to sign our painting. I'm going to sign mine there so I can see it. And when this section is dry, I'm going to go over it. Actually, it looks pretty dry. I'm just going to add those dots in there with the white paint. Like that. And that is our butterfly painting. I'll have to let this one dry a little bit more. That's still dark, wet. Any questions you have right now?
It's been fun.
Good. And I know it was a little more involved and you did great.
expected it to be more involved.
Yeah,
You didn't disappoint.
good. Well, we have some
Um,
easy ones and we have some harder ones. So,
Yeah,
got to have variety.
yeah,
Stretch ourselves a little bit.
yeah, I've always wanted to do this one, so thanks for running it again.
Good. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my workspace here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I am going to send out the recording of the class later on with the step-by-step instructions, and it will have the drawing included, the drawing that we did today. And as always, feel free to send me an email with any questions. And thank you for being here, and I hope you have a great weekend.